Hi there, my name's Richard. Today I'm very excited to show you and talk about this 11 by 14 view camera that I just finished working on. It's been a passion of mine for a long time to make kind of direct positives, paper negatives, that kind of thing. And I've worked with 4x5 film quite a bit, and I've always wanted to just be able to directly shoot a beautiful negative that I can contact print onto 11 by 14. It's been a size I've always loved. So over the last few months, I was able to actually complete this vision, and I'm really excited with how the camera turned out. All right, so I've managed to find a little bit of shade here where I can tell you about this camera. It doesn't have a name yet, but let me show you a little bit about kind of my design philosophies and how to put it together, how I set it up, a little bit about how I built it, and mostly what kinds of tools and other materials I've been able to gather in order to create this. And my hope is that looking at some of the materials that I use, I try to keep them as open source and easy to get as possible. So I'm hoping that by watching this video, you might be inspired to finally build the large format or ultra large format camera that you may be dreaming about. So let's get right into some of my design philosophies. One of my big inspirations was my wife's field easel or French easel. You know, one of those kind of wooden easels that has the legs and everything built in, so you can set it all up and have your canvas there. So I had this idea to be able to somehow fit the legs of the camera inside of the camera itself. So as I turn the camera around, you'll see that it does have this very skeletonized kind of design. And right here, front and center, are the legs. So that's actually the first step in setting up this camera, is to remove all of these legs that have their own little 1/4-20 screw threaded inserts built in there. And now that the legs are off, I will adjust them individually to the height that I think I might want for this shot. I'm looking out over this kind of very beautiful snowy vista. So I'm just going to extend these down to just 2 extensions, maybe about 3 feet. So I'll do that on all of the legs here. And then because these leg inserts built into the body here are kind of they're at their proper, I want to say, I can't remember the exact angle. I measured it off of my tripod. I think it's 32 degrees. And because they're at that angle, I can't just screw in the legs without first leaning back the camera. I have rubber feet on the bottom of the camera, of course. So I can just lean this back against those rubber feet and screw in each of these tripod legs here. Make sure they're moderately tight. Don't have to overdo it. Of course, these are just monopod legs, mostly the cheapest ones I could find that were as compact as I needed to fit in here. So I could always replace them or get different ones. I'm also going to take off my little carrying strap here. There we go. And then it's kind of this like picking up of the whole camera. It's not too heavy once it gets to this point. And then I can set it down just like that. So at the front, I've got these latches, there we go. And then on the side, I have these little arms here. So all of the parts that aren't just found from, you know, Home Depot, like the hinges and the, you know, the little bolt things, those are all Home Depot hardware parts. Everything else is found on Amazon.com, and it's all like hardware parts for cameras, a lot of Arca Swiss. A lot of kind of like flash brackets and stuff like that is the basis of this little arm here. I made it as well so that when I screw this one in, the corner here lines up for my 90 degree. Next, let's get our front standard set up. So hidden right here inside, there is a little Arca Swiss knob here. And then this whole U bracket shape comes out. So this front standard comes out from the underside, which is kind of the front side of that skeleton back. And then that can slot right onto this Arca rail and then clamp down. So the front movements here are all controlled via this, either the sliding on the plates, so I can do shift and slide and stuff like that. I can do my rise and fall right here off of these plates. And then here we have a two-way pan and tilt head, which is my major way of doing those kind of focus shifting movements. And it is quite stable. And then here on the actual lens mount itself, I have two plates. And normally the bottom one is going to go down here. The top plate, I can actually show you, is in case I need to do some like really significant fall. So if I do this rise and fall mechanism here, I can take it all the way off and then slot it back down here so that if I needed to do some kind of like, you know, putting the lens all the way down to there, I can then just clamp on the lens mount there into that Arca. But generally, all the shots I've done so far are just done with the standard height here. I just wanted to put that in as, you know, a safety mechanism. So all these movements are all just these Arca rails. I think these are a couple of 180 millimeter rails, a 200, maybe another 180, and they're just screwed in with the regular tripod mounts. Nice and tight. Sometimes I might use a little piece of mat board or something to add a little bit of more rigidity to that screw hold. And then these are directly threaded. I actually threaded the wood. This is all walnut, so it's pretty hard. So I was able to do a 3/8 inch thread into the wood itself. Hey there, sorry for the abrupt cutaway. I'm here after the trip and I'm reviewing the footage, and I'm just here to make a couple of extra notes. The first thing that I wanted to mention is a little bit more about this kind of very front standard here. So this is one Arca rail, and then these two vertical ones are also Arca rails. These are just Arca clamps, so those are pretty straightforward. And then the only additional part to actually make this kind of U bracket happen are these just standard Arca Swiss L brackets that you can get for your camera to, you know, be able to shoot vertically and horizontally. I found that is a pretty convenient way to make these 90 degrees. So then that would be an L bracket there and there. And then this is one more final Arca plate here. And this one, I made sure that I could screw it down onto two different points on each of those L brackets so I could avoid some torsioning. So get back to the main video and I might stop in again if I need to make some more notes. Okay, so here in this kind of carrying bag that I found at a thrift store, it's a pretty nice little bag. I have mostly stuff for the 11x14 camera. I also on this trip have just been taking a 35mm point and shoot, so I have a bunch of rolls set up in there. Boo, I'm back again already. I just wanted to mention the 35mm camera that I just talked about. So I actually went to an antique store and was able to find this Pentax Zoom 90 WR for like $7. So I tested it with one roll and then just decided, hey, I want to bring just this behemoth of a camera, and then I just want to bring a bunch of 35mm and just shoot on a point and shoot. So throughout the video, I might splice in some photos that I took with this camera while I was out shooting with this one. Inside of the main compartment, and I can unzip both sides, we have a little dark cloth, or a little, you know, viewing cloth. We've got some cable releases. I have a tape measure just in case I want to measure the bellows draw. I have this almost comically big but kind of useful Carson 4.5x loop, and they actually sell it to look at bugs like that. But I find it pretty convenient to just have a little bit of a bigger picture when looking through this ground glass. I have some tape just in case. I have this bulb release, which I love these things. I just find them so easy if I wanted to do a self-portrait or anything like that. I love these bulb releases. I have some gaff tape and some just black masking darkroom tape is what I call it. I've got a level, which I'll show in a second. It's pretty easy to level the camera if needed. So I can just put that in my pocket. And then finally we have the lens itself. So after a bit of searching and research on what would cover 11 by 14, and I'm partial to modern lenses, something that has like a PC sync port and relatively modern shutter speeds. I ended up choosing this Nikkor 360 millimeter f6.5. It's a Nikkor W. It was a good price. And so yeah, that's my one and only lens right now for the 11 by 14 camera. So that's the lens and the basic accessories, but let's talk film holders. So to me, the most challenging parts of building any camera, like the things you want to get first, are the lens, the film holder, and then probably the bellows is the next thing. With that, you're pretty much set to start designing and creating. So film holders are going to be a challenge for anything ultra large format, anything bigger than 8 by 10. It starts to become a challenge to be able to get your hands on those film holders. To even find them new, there's brands like Chamonix that are making gorgeous film holders, but they're incredibly expensive. They're way out of my price range. So after a bit of searching, I was stuck between buying some kind of older vintage film holders, and then I found on eBay Fire Studio. They make some really, really cool ultra large format cameras. They make an 11 by 14 camera that's really cool. And they also make like a 4 by 10 camera that's pretty neat. And they make these beautiful film holders. And so I was able to pick up 2 of these, and it's very, very handy to have your film holders before you go through designing, especially the spring back of your camera. Of course, you can make your own film holders. That certainly is something I'm really interested in doing. But that'll have to happen at a later date. I just wanted to get the camera done. So having the film holders was a major, major help for that. They also go inside of this beautiful bag that my good friend Ari made for me in exchange for some photos. So let's get this camera a little bit more set up. Let me put on this dark cloth. It's pretty small. My friend Ari also made this for me, but I like the size of it. It's kind of just enough to be able to put over your head and stay a little bit close to the bellows. I keep these little clips with me here in the kit. So there we go. That works well enough for a little dark cloth. Let's put our lens on, take off the back protector. Oh, another interesting thing about the lens is that I have installed inside the lens a 00 darkroom filter. Just one of the under lens kind of filters. I cut it to size, so you can see that that's orange there, because I'm shooting paper negatives right now with Ilford RC multi-grade paper. So having that pre-filtering to take some of the heat off of those highlights and bring them to more of a gray instead of a pure black. For example, like the snow and the clouds in this shot have the potential to get overexposed. And so having this filter pre-installed definitely helps. I'm gonna put that front cover back on. And I made this little 3D printed cover there. So this lens is on a Linhof board. And then I actually went online, maybe it was $30 or so, and I found an adapter, right? Just like a nice metal adapter from like a Cambo or some bigger format to the smaller format that you want. Just purchase that nice metal adapter with the slide and everything already built in, and then just use that as the basis for the rest of your front standard. That helped a lot in saving a bit of time and not having to build, you know, the mechanism to hold and fit and keep the lens light tight. So that was definitely a major help. All right, I'm back here after checking the exact listings that I got. So this is actually a 140 by 140 millimeter Cinar board adapting to a 99 by 96 Linhof board. So that's the general one that I found. It was by a place called CN Scope on eBay. You can see I have a little bit of bellows droop because I actually designed these bellows to be able to give me 1-to-1. So I can actually show you that now. Focus is down here. just these two little Arca Swiss knobs, and I have no gears. So that might be a contentious take. All of the focusing just happens through carefully sliding this Arca plate back and forth. I find it to work totally fine. I haven't had any kind of problems or anything, but you can see here, I did design the camera to be able to fit one-to-one. So that's why the bellows kind of have that much droop to them. I think my front leg here is fallen a little bit. There we go. So because those bellows are so long, I do have a little bit of droop. So a couple of these extra clamps here can help with that. Another thing you can do is you can actually look through the lens to see where that droop might be happening. So let me just push these up and then clip like the first two or three together like that, just to tighten up those bellows, and that gets rid of any general droop that might happen toward the infinity end of things. All right, so hopefully the exposure will let us see a little bit of this scene that I'm hoping to capture here. But let's take a look at the spring back. I think the first thing that was helpful to work on was this kind of frame. So I actually had my film holder, and then I built a wooden frame that is exactly the same size as that film holder. That was the easiest first step to take, so that I knew when I was going to build, you know, this other outside wall, gluing that in, I knew exactly if it fit this perfectly, then it would fit that film holder pretty much perfectly. So one thing about the spring back that I didn't quite clarify is that when I designed that initial back that holds the ground glass, I included 4 screw points and actually threaded the wood, or I could have put in some kind of nut and a bolt, some way so that I can easily take that frame back apart later in order to get that glass out. So that frame just isn't glued together. It is, you know, I have little bolts in each of the 4 corners. It of course can rotate, so it's maybe not the fastest rotating back in the world, but I'm gonna want to shoot a horizontal for this picture anyway. So we take off these 4 little 1/4-20 thumb screws, and then the whole back can slide off like this. We can see the inside of our bellows, of course, and everything like that. Now this is a double lip here. A thing I've learned is that light hates to travel in right angles. So if you can put a bunch, probably like 3 or 4 right angles built in to your design, whatever you want to be light tight, it tends to do a pretty good job. So I have this first angle inset, and then you can see it here as well. It has this secondary loop. So there's 1, 2, 3, and then a 4th right angle that this has to go through. So there's another 1/4 inch inset there. Then you just have the little standoffs for our 1/4-20 inserts. So it was very important for me that this whole back section is very rigid and also relatively easy to replace. So on Amazon, this is just a 1/4 inch piece of frosted acrylic. That's it. It works well enough for me. With the loop, you might be able to take a piece of like very fine sandpaper to it to get a slightly finer grit, but I find just the frosted 1/4 inch acrylic works fine. You could go maybe for a 4x5 camera, you could go with a 1/8 inch acrylic or 3 millimeters. But I find that for something this big, I don't want there to be any flex in that acrylic. So I just went with the full 1/4 inch or 6 mil. And then I needed, or I just really wanted, because I've become spoiled, a Fresnel lens. So this one took a little bit more searching, but on eBay, there was the company or a few different companies that are kind of selling these, they're like solar kind of things. So it's like when you were making those like solar cooking kind of things. I got the one-piece 400 by 300 millimeter optical PMMA plastic projector solar Fresnel lens plane magnifier from Optics World 2016 on eBay. They sell all kinds of Fresnel lenses, and this one's nice. You know, it's just a simple acrylic. It's maybe a 1/4 inch thick, but it's pretty clear and pretty rigid. And that was about $30. So all combined, the 1/4 inch 1114 frosted plexi, and then this more specific, it was bigger, so I had to trim it down to a central size, keeping that ring in the center. This was also about $30. So I'm in about $60. And I like that it is relatively easy to replace, should it get scratched or beat up or anything like that. And then, you know, this can just slide in here. It of course can go any direction. And then we just put our, you know what, I'll give you a closer look at, I know they might not be perfectly in focus, but these springs here are, these are just clothespins is all they are. These are just the springs of clothespins, and then just some screws that go through, and then this little bump here is glued onto that frame. So they come up just like that. And I find it to be rigid enough. It's a pretty light touch. So if I needed more tension, I could add a little tension spring here and here to add a little bit more. But I find it good for now. And it's easy to source is the main thing I love about those springs. I'm always amazed by all of the like machining work that folks are able to do in building these cameras and building these beautiful, like, you know, bar springs. But I want something that I can get really easily and just kind of experiment with. So either normal size or these kind of double wide clothespins. I just found them to be really easy to work with, both on this and a couple other spring backs I've made. So like I said, it does take a little more time than, you know, the really nice kind of flip and rotate backs, but you know, I'm not doing 11x14 for the speed of it. All right, let me talk briefly about leveling the camera. I've had a couple questions about that. So since the tripod legs are built in almost at the exact kind of angles that you might want to level, it actually isn't too bad. So I have this little pocket level here. I can line it up like that. I'm pretty good this way. I can maybe go down a touch. So then I can just go down as much as I need to, tighten that leg back down. There, we're centered there. Now I could come up in order to get this back level here. So then all I need to do is just come over here to the front, bump that up a little bit, tighten that leg back down. And so now I can level this way. I could of course always bend the, I could tilt the back a little bit as well. But for now, I'll just level it like this. There we go. A little bit less, that's okay. Just hold it, bring it down a touch, and then go there. Perfect. All right, so now we're level. On the front, it's going to be more a matter of our tilt, of course, which is controlled here on our lens. So there's our tilt that way. Perfect. So now we are level on both. Okay, so focusing the camera is pretty simple, right? So it's just this Arca Swiss clamp here, one on this side, one on the other side. And then you simply can push and pull your lens forward and back. I will note, hopefully you can see, yeah, if you can see here through to the back, there's actually a little U-shaped cutout here. And most of the time, let me give it a really quick focus. There we go. Infinity is about here for me. So I can actually hold my hands back through here and just kind of really gently pull it forward and back like that. So I'd love to show you a glimpse through the ground glass to see what I'm focusing on, but we all know how basically impossible that is. But I can tell you, even with that orange kind of filter in there, it is very, very lovely and bright. Right now I've got the mountains in focus for the most part. I may need to do the slightest of little shifts just to make sure I'm tack sharp all the way across. Now, I have a couple options for meters. I have this pocket light meter in here, but honestly, for paper exposures, I've really enjoyed using this app on my phone called Pocket Light Meter. Okay, so I was going to mention that I do carry the Gaussian Lunastar F2 pocket light meter. It works really well. I use it mostly for flash in the studio, but you can turn it into a little bit of a spot meter as well. But let me talk about this app that I mentioned and actually show you with a little bit of screen recording how it works. So if I open the app up here, you can see here, there we go. There is everything behind me, and you get this nice big view of the entire picture. And then down here at the bottom, I can adjust my ISO like that. And then I can, you could lock the shutter speed and then the aperture would move, or you can lock the aperture and then the shutter speed is going to move around. And you can tap around the screen to get different spot meter readings. So you could spot into the shadows there if you want to, or into the highlights. And then one of my favorite features is the log feature here. So if I hit log, then all of those settings are going to be saved into a little photo file, and then they're going to be saved into my camera roll. And that's going to include GPS data, it's going to include all those exposure settings and the time of day and everything like that. I just love having that, not just like the settings to reference back to, but also an exact like kind of image of where I was pointing on the screen and all of that. I'm gonna start at ISO 6, has been kind of my standard. All right, the wind is in a little bit of a lull. I've got my film holder, making sure the lens is closed. The lens is closed. Let's put our film holder in. There we go. Press down on these little edges just to make sure. I did check this with light leaks, and I added one little strip of gaff tape to the side of my film holders, and it's been pretty rock solid, light tight. Let me check my shutter one more time. Good. Loaded, lens closed. All right, I'm gonna pull the dark slide all the way out, wait for any shake to go away, and exposed. That sun is pretty bright right now. So without wasting too much time, I flipped that dark slide, so now it's on the lighter edge of this little indicator mark up here. Okay, so as you just saw, I was very wrong in my estimate of ISO 6 to work with, especially with this 00 filter installed in the lens. So as you just saw, that shot was quite underexposed, and I can show you the actual negative here. That negative is very, maybe not very, but it's a bit underexposed. So I realized after I developed this batch of photos that I needed to do some testing. So back at the hotel that I was staying at when I was on this trip, I just took a sheet of 11x14 and ripped it into quarters. So I had some smaller, like 5x7 size sheets. So my first experiment was just to use ISO 3 instead. So give myself an extra stop of light. And that was at 1/8 of a second, which I am calling the like faster end of things. So like 1/8 of a second and more, kind of calling a quicker shutter speed. And then my second one was just to test whether a longer shutter speed was going to end up being better. So this second one is also ISO 3, and then I adjusted the aperture, and then I have a 1 second shutter speed. And you can see this one is a little bit denser, a little bit nicer. Next, I wanted to test something I've heard about. There's a great Facebook group called Experimenting with Photographic Paper as Negatives or in-camera negatives. It's an awesome niche little Facebook group that has so much amazing information on it. And so a thing I've probably heard about from there is pre-flashing, right? We've heard of pre-flashing papers, and I wanted to experiment with in-camera pre-flashing. So instead of pre-flashing as I'm in the darkroom or loading my paper or film, I wanted to be able to pre-flash like on the day. So my experiment with that was to again meter at ISO 3, and I was doing kind of a general or slightly overexposed kind of spot metering into slight shadow. And then I found my settings, which was, again, it was f8 and it was 1/8 of a second, just like with the first test. And so I put a single weight piece of printer paper in front of the lens, and it wasn't directly lit, it was, just shaded. And then I did the same shutter speed that I metered for. So I took a 1/8 of a second exposure, but it would be totally blurred and totally white, so that acted as my pre-flash. And then I took the piece of paper away, and then I just shot the normal exposure. And it turned out pretty good. I feel like I retained a lot of the highlights, and I got a decent amount of the shadows, so that one worked well. And then my final test, which I think is what I'm going to do going forward, is I just exposed for ISO 2. And then that one was also 1/8 of a second, a little bit wider aperture. And I found that ISO 2 was a good setting for that kind of, medium to fast shutter speed, like 1/4, 1/8 of a second, 1/15 of a second, something like that. So then as we were driving home, I had the opportunity to go to Zion National Park, which I had never been to. We didn't have much time. We wanted to get home that day. So we took the scenic highway just as a nice hour excursion to see a little bit of Zion until I go back. But I actually stopped the car at one of the kind of lookout points, and I pulled out the camera, I set the whole thing up, and my wife took some video clips of me setting up this camera and getting a few shots. And for those, I metered at ISO 2.5. And I tried to get exposures of around a second. So I'm showing you some of those images on screen, and then I can also show you a couple of those giant negatives. And these look very sharp. I'm very happy with how these negatives came out. I think they have a very respectable amount of dynamic range for what you could expect out of a piece of paper. One thing that I found a little bit interesting is that I'm noticing some lens fall off there in the very corners, and it's pretty severe. So I guess I'm stretching this lens a little bit further than it really is wanting to. So if you have some tips for that, this is kind of like, I've shot 4x5 before, but going up to 8x10 or bigger 11x14, I would love some tips from those of you who have shot those ultra larger formats for checking lens coverage and all that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate some advice on that. So let's start breaking the camera down, and I'll talk about a couple of the final parts. One thing that I did want to mention is the bellows and the bellows construction. It was quite challenging. I ended up having to build 3 different sets of bellows before I got to ones that I felt like were good, like these. The biggest challenge was materials, but I found this really great material. I'm hoping to make maybe its own kind of video about simple bellows construction, but it's this blackout window vinyl. It's very cheap. It comes in a roll, and we use it in Arizona all the time to black out your windows to stay away from the heat. And it's 99%. Only with the brightest flashlight can any light be seen. So with ribs or 2 layers of it or an external fabric, I'm really confident that it would work really well. So here is a closer look at that blackout vinyl I was just talking about. This is a kind of folded over scrap piece, and it doesn't have any adhesive on it. It's designed to just peel off of a backing, and you spray a window with water, and then it kind of sticks on there with static. And the really nice thing about this material is that it's kind of glossy and accepts adhesives onto this glossy side, but then the other side of it is this kind of matte side. I mean, it's maybe a little more luster than it is matte, but I think for the interior of a bellows, it will be totally, absolutely fine. So moving forward, I love the green cloth that I put on these bellows. I wanted these to be really special and really nice, but moving forward, I think when I make bellows, I'm just going to use 2 sheets of this because it's very cheap, and I could have one on the inside, one on the outside, and it would give that pretty classic black bellows appearance, and it will be very durable, weatherproof, and it's very flexible and stretchable. So I think this is a great material, and I hope to make a couple more videos using it for bellows making and showing you exactly how to do it. I did have difficulty with adhesives. I used a lot of Super 77 spray adhesive, and I think that would work as long as you really nail down the proper amount of spray to use, and also the amount of time to kind of let it dry to get tacky. I think that was part of my difficulty was not quite letting it dry as long as I should. But it was a pretty okay process once I got the basic steps of it down. So I'll share some behind the scenes clips of that. Man, the wind. You can see it's good in the wind. That's pretty good. It's okay. So I'm also starting work on a super simple and easy to build 4x5 camera. Something that could use just a little bit of woodworking or maybe some 3D printed parts. And then that would be all you would need. And then in addition, I'm going to show in that how to build some very simple bellows to construction that would work using that vinyl material, as well as making the ground glass, sourcing it, kind of similar to what I did, sourcing a Fresnel lens and sourcing a piece of acrylic. So I am looking forward to completing work on that and sharing it with everybody. Okay, so maybe this is a little bit of a teaser or a preview of sorts. This is my 4x5 camera that I have been using for the longest time. And I made it a long time ago out of just frames. You know, these are just metal frames that you can clip together and you know, cut to size. And then the back is a little bit more tricky. It uses some laser cut pieces of plexiglass. But the rest of the parts is very similar to this camera here, right? So it's got these Arca rails as the main movements up at the top and the bottom, some very simple L brackets, and then these geared movement knobs down at the bottom. But all of this is just, again, parts from Amazon.com. So I'm in the process of making a very simplified version of even this that has every movement that you could really ever want it to have, but it should be very cheap to source all the parts for, or to build these out of a frame or wood. And I'm working on designing some 3D printed parts that you could print yourself if you wanted to follow like an exact design that I would make. But I'm excited to try and make a much more followable do-it-yourself kind of 4x5 camera. Just as a way to have like a very simple to make thing to get people into large format. I think that's one of the major things that I'd like to do with this channel and with my work is to make this kind of, you know, more niche photography, something that's very easy and accessible for anybody. So let me take off this one here. So you can see so far I've just put the lens away. Now I'm going to stow this side here. Then I am going to take off the front standard and it can kind of fold down just like that. Next, I'm going to take off our kind of front standard bracket. Again, I just want to mention that like I think so much can be gained by just searching for parts. Like that, I think is the biggest thing for me. I just go onto Amazon.com. I look at all different kinds of just Arca Swiss parts, Arca Swiss rails. I mean, they're out there. And I just love these modular designs. I mean, the woodworking I'm pretty proud of, but it's all pretty simple stuff. Everything done with the table saw or the drill press. I didn't get too fancy with any of my joinery. It's all simple miter joints. The spring back was definitely the hardest part as far as the woodworking is concerned. And the Bellows building was a little bit of a challenge, but I saved so much money and I learned so much. And then really it's kind of about, you know, making these parts to fit, like just having this single piece here out of wood with holes through it. So to explain a tiny bit more about this piece of wood that I'm talking about, it is just this area here where the Arca clamps are put on. So the base of the camera really is just this kind of reinforced miter jointed open box. And then this central single piece of 1-inch walnut is just running across. And then there are 3 screws for each of these 2 Arca clamps. And this central piece is actually not glued into the body. It's actually put in with just these metal L brackets. So I had to cut it to be pretty exact in its sizing. And the reason for that is just in case I wanted to move something, change around something, I wanted to be able to potentially take out that central unit and switch it around and move it around. And you'll also notice that on the inside, I have a secondary little Arca clamp that this front standard comes off and clips into. And then on the inside, I have a few more of those 1/4-20 wood inserts. I really like the ones that use a hex key. These Arca Swiss clamps are so strong. And I also will just search for the cheapest ones, right? Like maybe getting a clamp that's a little bit longer or a little bit shorter will save you that like extra money to then go buy some other parts. And so, you know, I find that to be one of the fun parts. Another thing I love about this design is all of these mechanical parts, if I ever do want to exchange it for some type of geared movement or exchange it for, you know, just something that locks it at 90 degrees so I know it's perfectly in focus, you know, it's super modular. I can change it however I want. And I find that super, super valuable. So let me take this one off now. All right. Then the front standard with its little cover on can be brought down. I like to go down there and give it a peek just to make sure it's kind of sitting nice and flat the way I like it to. Then all we have to do is put our little latches back on. Just quickly to mention the kind of extra hardware, like these little latches were from Amazon. This little handle here, these D-rings, the hinges on the back, and the little bumpers were all from Home Depot. So those parts are, you know, just whatever you can source, whatever you want to fit the project you need. Then from here, so you pick it up and then you kind of have to pre-lean it. You can rest it against your foot if you want to, and then just take off. I'm fine resting it on the ground. I don't care if it's a little dirty. There we go. We can take off these here. All right, so here's a view of this inside. You can see we already have our front standard in here. This one first up here at the top. There was quite a bit of Tetris in the design phases. Getting this all to work. There we go. So that's about it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was useful or interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments section. And I'm going to be writing you know, a big full description that has as much info as I can possibly give. The camera isn't light, if you were wondering. It is about 26 pounds. But for, you know, with a little strap or something like this, it's totally fine. Again, I really appreciate my friend Ari for giving me, making me this bag. And yeah, I hope to see you again soon and get out there and make some photos. I want to get that. I want to use this sound in the video. Okay, here we go.